My conversation with Bill Thompson was profound and thought-provoking. We tackled the subjects of privilege, access, and belonging, and he shines a light on the forgotten children, those who have been oppressed by poverty, lack of economic opportunity, and racial and social discrimination. His broad empathy is informed by his own experience of being an outsider growing up, and he weaves the story of his life into his mission today, which is helping kids find their power by claiming their own narratives through storytelling. Thank you, Bill, for reminding us that we all need to have agency in our lives, no matter our age or social condition. Hello, and welcome to another installment of At the Podium with me, Patrick Huey. At the Podium is a platform where we will learn from people who come from different walks of life, careers, and experiences, but all share one thing in common. They have stepped fully into the transformative power of saying yes to the unexpected turns of their lives, and they are now using the power of their voice, or podium, to make an impact on the world we live in today. At the Podium is the intersection of art, culture, and big thoughts wrapped up in good, old-fashioned conversation. Today, I'm thrilled and humbled to share the podium with Bill Thompson. Bill is the executive director of Young Storytellers, a nonprofit organization that sparks young people's creative self-discovery through storytelling. The program highlights young people as the center of their own narratives. It emphasizes that their stories matter and celebrates their unique voices. Young Storytellers works towards a future where young people experience, through the stories they write, the impact that their thoughts, feelings, and words can have on the world in which they live. As a nonprofit executive, Bill is a member of the Policy Council for the California Alliance for Arts Education and is a graduate of the Annenberg Foundation Executive Leadership Seminar. Bill recently completed the Executive Education Program in Nonprofit Leadership at the Stanford University Graduate School of Business. Outside of the office, Bill is an avid fan of the New York Yankees and is the proud father of two sons, Theo and Quinn. Bill is a graduate of the Yale Drama School, where he received his MFA in acting, and he also attended the University of the Arts, where he received his BFA. Before we hear from Bill, I want to invite you to share at the podium with the people in your lives. If you find our conversation today valuable, and I hope you will, take a screenshot and share on your Instagram and tag @thepodium_Patrick Huey. Or if you're on Facebook, share our link there. Your shares, likes, and 5-star written reviews help grow our audience and move us up the charts. I'm grateful for your help in this capacity. Okay, Bill, welcome to At the Podium. And no one can say that you are not thoroughly educated.
I think it's a great equalizer. If I look at where I come from, my family, and like where my family comes from and where I am today, it's education that got me here, that provided me with so many opportunities. So, and I don't think we don't have the privilege of ever stopping our learning. So for me, I think there is just this drive for constant improvement. Mm-hmm. And I think education obviously helps with that, because we don't know what we don't know. And hopefully other people have that wisdom to impart. Storytelling is an equalizer in the sense that you find shared humanity, you find shared experience, because storytelling is typically more about what we have in common than what our differences are.
Right.
And I think it's an incredibly powerful tool.
You just said so much that I want to get into all of it. Where your family comes from, talk about that and what your background is in terms of the education piece.
I have kind of like an upstairs, downstairs family. My mom's side of the family was working poor. I had cousins and aunts and uncles growing up that were like berry farmers. They grew berries and then sold them on the side of the road at like a roadside fruit stand. My dad's side of the family, they were more like business inclined, like mom and pop self-made business. They had like a butcher shop in Staten Island. and like a corner store. And then they went in, they ended up like running a hotel. And that's where my parents met. So my mom's father managed the hotel that my dad's father owned like outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And then that's where they met, got married, and I'm the product of that.
So how did you get from there to Yale? So how did you make that leap from these sort of unique beginnings to all of a sudden being at this university in Connecticut?
Luck, privilege. I think part of it is like I'm a white guy who, like a straight white guy, and like so much of the theater was like, I mean, it still continues to be, but it certainly was when we were there. It was like made for me, for my stories. So I looked like the normal, the average, the every guy that was centered in all of these narratives. So I think part of it is just the privilege of that I happened to be the white guy that could walk into that room, and just luck. I mean, luck that I was chosen out of, however many other white guys that were auditioning for the school. So I think it's that. And then how I ended up in the theater, because I had an arts poor background, right? Like when I got to high school, my parents got divorced. I moved to Delaware with my mom. I mean, it's crazy when I think about this because she was younger than I am now, and she was putting herself through college. And she and I moved into her cousin's house because like she didn't have a job. Like she didn't have enough money to pay for us to live. I went to a new school and I was like really lost. I had moved my entire life, like every couple of years. And I had just spent 4 or 5 years in a suburb of Philadelphia. And I had really felt roots and connected in like a home. And of course, when my folks got divorced like that, and my dad moved like 1,000 miles away, and it wasn't like a co-parenting situation like people do now. And I ended up at this high school, and I went into my guidance counselor, and I was a freshman, but I was like, I want to take this political science class. And I should add, I was like a young Republican. I had grown up a young Reaganite. I had like letters from Ronald Reagan, Alex P. Keaton, right? So I was trying to get into this political science class, and this guidance counselor was like, well, that's for juniors only. And I was like, all right, well, can I take economics? She was like, that's for juniors only. And she was like, well, the only thing you can take is study hall or a theater class. And she was like, just take the theater class. It's an easy A. And I was like, all right, I don't want to be in study hall, so fine, I'll take the theater class. I had never seen a play before. I had never seen live music before, live dance. Like the only museum I'd ever been to was like the Smithsonian. I was not steeped in the arts at all. And I go into this theater class, and the guy who's running it, he's like, okay, we're doing monologues from Vietnam era playwrights. So pick something. And I picked this monologue from this play Streamers by David Rabe. I did it. And I was just reading it. Like I didn't memorize it. I was literally reading it off the page. And after the class, he was like, stick around a bit. I want to talk to you for a minute. And he was like, so do you want to do stuff like this? Did you like that? Like, do you have any interest in theater? And I was like, I don't know. I'm here because the guidance counselor told me it would be an easy A. He said, well, why don't you, I'm directing a play, come audition for the play. And at that point I was like, all right, anything to like not be at my mom's cousin's house and like to have something to do after school. And I had no friends. And so I said, yes. So I ended up auditioning for this play, and I got cast, and it was Richard III. So I played Clarence and Richard III at Shakespeare, which I had never even read Shakespeare at that point. And then then I was cast in Medea. And then I went to like this summer program at the University of Iowa, near where my grandparents live. They actually paid for me to go to this 2-week summer program that summer. And it just changed the entire trajectory of my life. It ends up that this teacher was writing grant applications at night, and he was bringing in like the David Parsons Dance Company performed at the school, and the Mendelssohn String Quartet came and played. And like, I'm at this public school in Delaware, but all this incredible art is like happening there because of this one guy. And he saw something in me that I had no idea existed, and it changed my life forever. It's like the reason I'm sitting here today. So when I say luck and opportunity and privilege, I mean, it's all of those things that led me from where I came from to where I am to Yale. I mean, that was a big shift. I had never understood wealth. Like I thought the rich people were like the doctor and the lawyer with the Volvo. Like that was rich to me. Like I didn't understand until you're in a place like that. And that was the thing I appreciated the most about the drama school, is that was true for most of us. It wasn't like Yale College, where like a lot of those kids came from wealth and like financial privilege. I feel like a large section of us at the drama school we were like outsiders. Like we were not a part of that club, which I appreciated because it made me feel a little less, I don't know, just a little less like it made me feel a little more, I should say, like I belonged.
I remember going to Vanderbilt for my undergrad and arriving at Vanderbilt and really, I've never wanted for anything in my life. I've never really experienced that. I remember going to Vanderbilt and just seeing the extreme wealth that people lived with. It changes how you view the world because you understand that there are many different types of lives that people live that most people have no idea about. And the access that people have, it's not an equalizer, that's for sure. It's interesting to me, though, because the story you described seems to fit beautifully with what you're doing now in terms of something sparking a creative voice within yourself that sort of changed your life, which seems to be, and if I'm understanding young storytellers properly, that's the point, that you empower these young people to create or tell these narratives and embody them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is the point. The point certainly isn't to send them to drama school. I'll be clear about that. Like the point is not to we're not trying to create the next generation of artists or storytellers. Really what we're trying to do is to provide a space for kids who, are, first of all, they're systemically oppressed and they're a part of a public education system that is doing them no favors, right? Because of years of oppression and racism, these schools are underfunded. They don't have what they need academically, but they also aren't able to deal with the holistic needs of these children, right? That come from poverty, lack of economic opportunity, the housing crisis, healthcare. I mean, you name it. These kids are on the front lines of everything that is ailing our society, right? And the school is now a clearinghouse. The public school is a clearinghouse for that, right? And is now expected to meet all of those needs, but is profoundly incapable of meeting those needs because they lack the funding and the expertise. I mean, no one place can meet all those needs, right? And inside of that ecosystem are kids who are struggling and kids who are left behind and kids who are sitting in the back of the class and disengaged and feel that they have nothing to offer. And I think we're trying to provide a space for those kids. The teachers hand select the students that are going to benefit the most from having a one-on-one engagement with a caring adult who is literally just providing a space for them to create a story about whatever they want to write about. And every word is theirs. And it comes wholly from their imagination, from their experience. What they write and what they create is an expression of that. And I think the goal is for them to realize that regardless of circumstance, regardless of systems, they have something beautiful within themselves, something unique to themselves, which is their story, their perspective, their point of view, and that is actually power. If you harness your narrative, if you harness your story, if you understand narrative, you can change the way people feel. And most importantly, you can change the way people behave. And that really is power. And so that, I think, is the thrust of what we're doing. We start with them when they're 10. So we're not explicit about that with them, right? And we hide the learning in play and imagination and creativity. But the kids are writing about what's happening in the world. They're just writing about it through metaphor because at that age, that's how they process and understand the world around them is through metaphor. But they are dealing with everything that we as adults should be trying to fix.
How did you find them? You said that Young Storytellers was the best hour of your week. You're launched out of the Yale School of Drama. You're going to have a career as an actor. You start volunteering with this organization. And a few years later, you're running the organization. How did that happen for you?
Again, it's all very clear in hindsight. But when I was living it, there was no clarity at all. I was lost. I got out of Yale. I moved to New York. I spent about 3 years acting. It was horrible. I had a horrible 3 years. Not because I didn't have success in those 3 years, but my experience of that success was not what I thought it would be. And so I quit acting. For the year that I quit, I was nominated for a Drama Desk Award. booked a bunch of television stuff. I did a couple of plays. I probably made 20 grand, which at the time, I mean, as an actor, like that was amazing. I was still waiting tables and cleaning apartments, but I was making money as an actor. But I was so off my center especially when I thought I was getting the prize. So I got this episode of Law and Order, and I shot this episode of Law and Order, and I was astonished at how miserable everybody was. And I was looking around and I was like, well, wait, this is what I want more than anything, is like that guy's job. And he's miserable and bitter. This is not a community. Like it was not at all what I thought it was going to be. And, the same thing, like the Drama Desk Awards at Lincoln Center, and it's all this fancy, and that year was like Hurley Burley and Spam-A-Lot. There were all these fancy movie stars there that year. And I just felt out of place. I just felt like it just didn't feel like me. And I remember like I splurged on a cab ride home from Lincoln Center, and I like sat on the couch and like ate a pint of like Ben and Jerry's ice cream and watched the replay of the Yankees. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, it just doesn't feel right. So I did my last play I did with Kate Nowlin. I did a play at the Huntington in Boston, The Real Thing by Tom Stoppard. Is a beautiful play that Evan Unulis directed. And a couple of things happened. The lead actor in the play was this brilliant actor, had like gone to Juilliard, probably around my age that I am now, like early 40s. He and his wife had just had a baby. They didn't have enough money to keep their apartment, and he had to take the job. So like they were living in like Boston University housing, and he had like a newborn baby in like student housing. And he was like downstairs at Starbucks, like memorizing his lines. And I looked at him and I was like, if everything goes right for me, that's my life in 15, 20 years. If everything pans out, like that's, I've been on Broadway, I've done all this stuff. And then Nick Pepper came to the show. And, Nick quit acting really. I don't think he acted at all out of Yale. Like he immediately headed to Los Angeles and he was like, I'm going to be a big shot. Like I'm going to be a producer. And I looked at Nick and he had his BlackBerry and he was so important. And I had produced a play at the Fringe Festival. I produced Cats Talk Back with Bess at the Fringe Festival, and it like won the Fringe Festival. And that experience for me was probably the highlight of my time in New York. Being a producer, helping to provide a space for like this voice that I really believed in. Bess's voice, I thought like her creative voice was astonishing. That group of actors was so dear to me. That experience was like the highlight of my time in New York. And I looked at Nick and I was like, maybe I can do that and actually make some money and be like Nick. So I went back to New York. I told my agents, I was like, I'm quitting, I'm done. And I like sublet my apartment. I bought a car on eBay. I quit smoking. I had this weird like 28-year-old like crisis. And I drove across the country and I got out here. And then I tried to do the Yale Mafia thing of anyone who went to Yale that would be willing to meet with me. I met with, asked them, how did you become a producer? How do you get your foot in the business? How do you work in film and television? I got a couple of like unpaid internships, and then I got my first job. So my first job was working for this guy. He had a management company and a production company. And I was working on this TV show called Burn Notice. I was helping on the pilot of that before it made it to air. And my boss came in one day and he was like, hey, I need you at lunch today to go down to this elementary school. I was like, what? And he was like, listen, when I was in grad school, I started this nonprofit. They don't have enough volunteers. I told him I'd send someone from the office. He's like, I need you to go down there. And I was like, all right, no idea what I'm going to do. And I wasn't like, I'm not a kid person. I hadn't been around like 10-year-olds since I was 10. I'm an only child. I'd never volunteered with children. They were like alien to me, right? Like they're just this other, I'm still not a kid person. And I like do this job.
You have two, Bill.
I have to be a kid. I mean, they're my kids. So it's a little different. I show up at this school. I have no idea what to expect. And the first thing that like really like resonated with me was that it was very different from the public schools that I went to. So like the public schools that I went to and like all these suburban and more rural neighborhoods were like open green fields, basketball courts and playgrounds and kids playing on them. And I walk up to this school and it's like surrounded by a chain link fence. You got to go through like multiple layers of security to get in. There's all these like signs that are very forbidding that basically just send the message like, stay out. And I went in and I was paired with this girl who, could on the surface, like the complete opposite of me. She's Latina, struggling to learn English. It's her second language, so painfully shy. She could barely make eye contact with me, not to mention like engage with me in conversation. Probably the only thing we had in common in that moment was that we were both just terrified of each other, right? And terrified of like, well, we had no idea what we were doing there. But I kept showing up every week to this program, and she started to open up, and we wrote this incredibly beautiful story where there's a girl whose folks are about to be evicted from their apartment because they don't have enough money to pay the rent. But she has a secret imaginary friend that is a magical flying unicorn. And that unicorn says, hey, take me to school. You can let all your friends ride on me and they can buy tickets. And with that money, you can like help your parents. So she writes this story and there's like a flying unicorn. It's just this like beautiful story just from this girl, like obviously seeing struggles at home and then using her imagination and feeling like, wanting to have agency to be able to help her family. And after she had finished writing the story, these actors came, these professional actors showed up to perform the story. And, they're auditioning for her and I'm helping her cast the actors in the parts. And she walks down this red carpet. She's getting a standing ovation from her classmates. This girl that I could like barely get a yes or no answer out of like 6 weeks earlier. She's like poised, introducing her story on stage. Her mom is like in tears in the audience. And I'm just looking at all of this and I'm like, holy, this is it. This story matters. I'm working on like this spy show in Miami that I like honestly couldn't care less about. And all these resources and money and attention is going to that. But this is where it's at, right? And I felt like she transformed in front of me. It transformed me. And I went to so the program ended and I was like, it was summer. And I was like, oh, that was the greatest thing. And I'm like, now I'm just doing my job. And I was complaining to my now wife. And I said, maybe I should go back to New York. Like, I'm just not feeling Hollywood. I'm a fan of film and television, but I have no compulsion to like really create in these mediums. I miss live performance. I miss community. I miss all those things that like the best parts of the theater. And she was like, well, why don't you just ask your boss if you can go work at Young Storytellers? And I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. So I was like, all right. So I went to him and I was like, maybe this isn't a fit for me, but what if I went to like produce Young Storytellers? Like, what if I helped do something with it? Right. And he was like, okay. And he like picked up the phone and called the woman who was running it. And I worked there a week later. He could have very easily been like, get out of here, kid. Right. Like there's people lined up around the block want to work in television and like, how dare you? But he wasn't. He just said, okay. I started working there and I took over a couple years later. And I didn't think it was permanent. Like I thought it was a temporary thing. Like it was something I wanted to do. And I felt it was fulfilling like my need for purpose. But I didn't think that 10 years later, I would still be doing it. But I think every day that I've been here, I mean, you said earlier of this opportunity of saying yes, or like how your life changes when you say yes. I think every day has been an opportunity for me to say yes to this. And I'm just like super grateful that I've had that.
Do you feel that the moves you made were an act of courage, or were they just natural extensions of what was happening within you at those moments?
Yeah, they weren't an act of courage. That would be a nice story. I think that they were. I am someone who believes in saying yes to opportunities. So I do think that like that is, for whatever reason, it is part of how I've lived my life. But I didn't see any of this. To be honest, like this is crazy. I'll share this with you. So I got that job working for, one of the founders of Young Storytellers. But the same week I got that job, I got a job working for Rollin Jones's manager. So I got 2 job offers in 1 week. I chose the job because I wasn't going to have to drive 45 minutes to get there.
LA, that's important.
Well, right. It was, and in hindsight, but this is as a New Yorker, right? So this is coming from New York, and like I could walk to one job and the other one I'd be driving 45 minutes each way. And I was like, well, they're both working for management companies. I was like, I love Rollin and it's awesome that I could work there, but I was like, I'll take the one that I can walk to because that gives me a feeling of like my old lifestyle that I miss. But I literally made the decision because of the commute. And then I was the employee that day. It's all luck. It's all random. Like he walked in, there were 8 other people he could have sent to that elementary school. He chose me. I said yes to it. And I was open to it changing me. But
I don't know if it's luck. I think
luck, call it whatever. I mean, call it what you will. I will say it is something that that was not in my control. Right? I was not controlling it. I did not divine it.
There must have been something within you. There has to be something within you and within the moment of all those transactions you just described, that was your path. Listening to you tell the story, it lines up perfectly with the trajectory of your life and your childhood experiences all the way through to where you are now, that all of that comes to bear in this role that you have, where you're dealing with people who, like you felt in some capacity, were outsiders or feel like they're outsiders or not supported by whatever those systems are. It just feels like there's a little bit more at play than luck, and that you had the bravery to change what the goal was potentially when you first walked out of Yale or walked into Yale or whatever that was.
I struggle with the idea of bravery. It's funny. It's like I struggle centering myself in this story. But I do struggle with that because I think a lot about, I think a lot about privilege and systems and agency, right? And the myth of agency, that we only have the agency that we're afforded, right? I feel that I've been afforded, again, by virtue of, white, straight, cisgendered, male, so much potential for agency. I don't feel comfortable saying that it's like, that was bravery or courage, because honestly, like I was operating out of a sense of self-interest, right? I think what I was searching for shifted. I think I was searching for things when I was younger that would fulfill my ego. And when I achieved those things or I attained those things, I still had a hole. And then part of my growing up was realizing like, oh, that's not the answer to the whole. The ego is not the answer to the whole. And then I was gifted with young storytellers. I was gifted with an opportunity of what it means to serve others. That gave me that filled that hole.
And maybe it isn't bravery, but maybe it's in a way it is brave to walk through new doors. Because oftentimes people spend their whole lives not doing that.
Yeah.
And maybe from your perspective, it's not bravery in the traditional sense of the word bravery. But we all know people in our lives who are stuck because they don't have the privilege, the fortitude, the courage, the bravery to walk through doors that open for them, to have the presence of mind and self to just say, okay, here's an opportunity. I'm going to leave my career in New York and hop in a car, quit smoking and move to LA. That's an act of bravery to move past those things that are comforts to us.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I would say though, that I was made for that. Like my life led to that because I never lived anywhere longer than 4.5 years growing up. So I was always the new kid. I always moved. I always had to walk through the door, whether I wanted to or not. I didn't have a choice. And of course, I think that shapes who you are when you have that lived experience of I've always felt that I was an assimilator, which is a crazy thing to say as someone who's like a straight white guy in America. But I always felt that I assimilated in environments that I was put in my entire life. I didn't understand the privilege. I didn't understand that like the assumptions that were made of me were always the positive assumptions. So the assumptions that were made of me was that I was wealthy, I was educated, I was all of these things, more educated, wealthier than I ever was. So I often felt in my life, and still have moments of feeling like an imposter, because I don't feel inside the way that I am viewed externally. Now, of course, woe is me, because the external view is like, the assumption is the best of the best, right? But so again, I'm going to push back on this idea that like I chose that for myself because I think it's a product of my lived experience. And yes, it's part of who I am, but I don't know how to be any other way. I don't know how to not walk in the door.
I think it's interesting that you feel like an assimilator and an outsider, which I think creates a large empathetic space within you for people who actually may be living that existence from a completely separate point of view.
Yes, I am more personally and socially and like emotionally comfortable with people who have experienced marginalization in their lives than I am with people who have not. I have a hard time connecting and engaging with people that have only come from a place of privilege. I really do. It's not to say that like I don't have like strong relationships with white people in my life. Like my life, I do, of course. But it is something that I felt for my entire existence. When I was building friendships, the friendships I built were typically, and maybe it was because even though I was like, you know, I was like always the new kid. So I was coming in, and it was the folks who were more marginalized were the ones that like opened their arms to me.
I want to push back a little bit on the privilege thing, because if privilege is the thing that separates us, and privilege it exists, that no one's questioning that.
Right.
We can't let privilege be the reason why we don't do. And I think we're in agreement on that, perhaps.
100%. I think when I speak of privilege, I just am talking about my own privilege, right? Like I'm still trying to figure out how to reconcile the myth of the meritocracy, the myth of what have I achieved and accomplished, against the truth and reality of what have I been allowed to achieve and accomplish. And those things are there's a conflict between those two things. And I have not fully reconciled how much of that I can own, or how much of that was actually given to me. So that's my thinking about privilege. It's really with regards to me. I believe really strongly. Well, I believe really strongly that there are young people who are exceptional that can transcend privilege. But I see so many kids that, if they were provided with actual equity and opportunity, would be living far richer, more fulfilling lives than they're able to lead. So I think it's hard because we do focus on the outliers. And I think there are many outliers, but there's also many that never escape. You know, my wife is a psychiatric social worker at a continuation high school for kids who are emancipating, mostly out of the foster care system, but also from probation, like probation youth. You know, and I look at those kids, and those kids are not making it. And it's not their fault. It's hard because the kids who do make it out, the kids who do break the cycle, they're almost superhuman when you look at what they're having to contend with, but the vast majority of them don't. And I don't think I even understood that until seeing like the world through my wife's work, seeing the way that her community has been decimated by COVID in a way that even our schools that are all Title I schools, you know, they're all Title I public schools, our students have not been impacted to the degree that her students have. Every single kid has lost a family member to COVID. They've all had it, because these are kids who are coming from South LA, East LA, deep in the valley, like the hardest hit areas. So privilege is also very, very front of mind for me, because there are degrees of privilege, like there are degrees of everything.
In my conversation with Regina Bain, we've talked about...
But she and I have been connecting just because she's now a fellow executive director after she left Posse.
Yes. And so we've talked about privilege, and it's, as a society, about this idea of privilege, and sort of, there can't just be one type of privilege that we're talking about. Because
you're right.
It's like the Alexander technique. Like your kinesthetic awareness of your life is not necessarily what's really happening in your life. And so you, Bill, could have this feeling of being an assimilator and not being afforded the privileges that the people you went to school with had. But that's a very different awareness of life than, say, the young lady whom you talked about in the story. So I think this idea of privilege and who has it and doesn't have it is a very malleable thing. And I think it can also lead us down paths that can be very counterproductive to what we want to do.
And you're right. Well, it's not just racial privilege either, right? I have a lot of poor white family members. If I were to have a conversation about privilege with them, would feel disenfranchised. There are many different kinds of privilege. So there is a racial privilege, but I've also benefited from an economic privilege and the privilege of education and the privilege of exposure to culture and the arts. These are all privileges, and you can't separate them all out. So even when I think about myself, I'm not here because of just my white privilege or my male privilege or my, like, all of the things that are, it all creates an environment. It's intersectionality. The economic privilege is an interesting one because I look at because I'm confused by this. Like, I look at some of my cousins and I don't understand why they're not more successful, or like why they didn't have more of a drive or more ambition or work, because like we had similar things happening to us, similar family dynamics. We come from a similar place. Like, so what is that? I don't know what the answer to that. Again, a lot of it I feel like is sometimes, I know you're going to hate this word luck, but that I had this opportunity presented because none of them had that drama teacher who came in and did that thing, or we feel as if we own it because we are, it's our existence, it's our lives. But I don't know.
We're in an interesting moment. I think it really does become about how we heal, how we come together, how we speak truthfully about our experiences. But I'm intrigued by this idea of privilege that we're talking about.
Your instinct towards healing, there is nothing without that. Otherwise, there's civil war. Like, if we don't heal, there literally we will just be a nation divided upon some lines, either racial lines or economic lines or whatever it is.
There has to be a way that people see each other not as the enemy, but see the shared humanity that we have. And it's very complicated when you start layering in race and social class and gender identification. It seems like we're moving further and further from being able to have those real kind of moments of conversation with people. You can go on for hours. Thank you so much for your time today and your willingness to share your voice and wisdom with us. I am beyond grateful that you were at the podium. And remember, we all have a voice. Use yours wisely.